We are back in after our lunch recess. Sorry for the delay in getting ramped back up. We will now have interim study that is authored by Representative Lewis Moore, gentleman from Edmond. And I will turn it over to him. Some of you were here earlier, most of you were not. Again, the purpose of the interim study is to educate legislators about issues or processes, the primary purpose being to develop policy, potentially develop policy. And again, it is not necessarily a public forum. It is at the discretion of the author whether he wants to take statements from the public at the end of the study. Otherwise, I'll turn it over to him, and we are due to adjourn at 2:30, although we're getting started a little bit late, so 2:40, and then we will be back here tomorrow at 9 o'clock to finish up our interim studies. So unless there's any other business we need to address, recognize Representative Moore.
Thank you very much. I'm not anticipating going to the 2:30 mark, although I do want to encourage as much public discourse and participation as possible so that we might get a head start, rolling start on the session and preparation for whatever legislation might be necessary to either slightly adjust what we're doing or come up with new ideas altogether. So we welcome your participation in that. So Mark Leota is going to come and speak first, and we appreciate your being here. And this mic right here, you just lift that up. Thank you.
Mr. Leota, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to feel silly.
Sure, that's absolutely fine. Thank you. We just want to make sure we speak into the microphone for those who are monitoring online.
Great.
Thank you. You're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Moore asked me to do a few things this morning. First of all, give an update on the commission, some effects of the new statute that we're operating under, discuss some of the court cases and their effect on the commission. I'm going to throw in a little bit of effects on premiums, and then talk a little bit about 24-hour coverage. The main thing that I try to get across to people is what you'll find at the commission now is a properly functioning, efficient, cohesive unit. And I'm very proud of the changes we've made over the last year and a half. They have been significant. What we found when the governor brought me in, we found some difficulties. There was no solid, commonly understood organizational structure. There was a somewhat ineffective management model that divided the commission into thirds, and a somewhat divisive culture. And so that was difficult to build on, and we had to make some structural changes right off the bat. Now there is a commonly understood organizational structure, and that's basic, that's foundational. And that allowed us to build. Employees now have detailed and understood job descriptions, which they didn't have before, training plans that give them a path through the organization, a policy manual so that they can work, they know how to work within the organization. Those basic things, a lot of HR functions we put in place that were not there. And so the culture and the structure have been significantly improved. A major task that we faced coming in was to get us out of the media, get us out of the paper. Over the last year and a half, we've been able to do that. You've not seen us in the paper for anything that the commission does that on a regular basis could be described as embarrassing or improper. There have been a couple of major events, but you're going to have those. So for the most part, we've gotten the commission out of the media for everyday operations. We're following the Open Meetings Act. That's pretty important. And one of the things that I wanted to show is that when I got there is that you can do the public's business and follow the Open Meetings Act if you're going to discuss something, you just need to discuss it in a public meeting, and it's not that difficult. I got to do that for 8 years at Tulsa County, and so that's one of the things that I thought I brought to the commission. So we have a better equipped and competent staff. We do have more hands on deck, but at a lower salary cost because we are operating under a structured pay scale, which they didn't have before. And so we got more people and we're spending less money. So let me talk a little bit about the effects of the statute. My friend Bob Burke will argue with me, but he's wrong. We are down 66% in claims from 4 years ago. In claims filed across the state, the old court was seeing an average of 14,000 to 15,000 claims per year. This last year we saw about, and the number moves around a little bit, but about 6,200. Even if we see a 15% increase over the next year, we'll be up around 7,500. That's still half of what the court was seeing. So, and that's the argument that Bob makes, is that there's a 15% increase. Well, that's on top of a 66% drop. The court operated with 14 judges at full bore. We operate with 5. That's a significant difference, and that's a function of volume and efficiency. The court had over 70 employees. We operate currently with 41. Now, we'll tell you that we are understaffed in a couple of areas. I see with the increase in cases resulting from court cases, increase in filings, we're probably going to top out around, I'd say 46 employees is probably an optimum number. Still, almost half of what a little over half of what the court operated with. Another thing that my friend Bob Burke will argue with me is the loss costs that we're experiencing across the state are down 44%, which is a portion of premiums. It does affect, it's a significant effect on premiums in addition to other market forces. So those are some of the effects that we've seen of the statute. Some of the court cases, and I want to be careful about what I say about them just because they may revisit me, and so I'll just talk generally about the court cases that have come up recently. The court ruled recently on PPD, permanent partial disability. The statute as written limited PPD in a way. It deferred it if the injured worker went back to work, and then it wore it away the longer they were there. I think a lot of people questioned the constitutionality of that specific provision, and the court did find it unconstitutional. We had the parking lot case recently where the court identified the statutory limitation on coverage if an injury happens in a parking lot. They identified that as unconstitutional if the parking lot is under the control or ownership of the owner of the business or entity. And so we'll see more cases. We'll see more parking lot cases as a result of that ruling. The court also threw out the 180-day eligibility for cumulative trauma. They saw that the way the statute was written, you had to work somewhere 180 days before you could file a cumulative trauma claim. The court threw that out as an arbitrary number, and in effect left it up to the judge's discretion, the administrative law judge. And then the Maxwell case, which is a significant case. Let me see if I can boil it down. Prior to the Maxwell case, the judges were using the 6th edition, which kept awards very small. The court threw that out and left it up to the ALJs to do what judges do, decide between the parties what they're asking for, what is a fair award for an injury. And they've gone from an average around 2% to an average between 7 and 10%. So there has been an increase in the awards, but it is still significantly lower than the average we saw under the court at around 25% in the old system. We heard from NCCI this morning, and the representative was there with us, and I really got a good overview of the effects on premiums. You know, premiums are not A minus B equals C, and that's your premium. They really are A through M minus N through Z, and that gives you your premium. There are so many factors that put pressure up on premiums and so many factors that put pressure down on premiums, and I just noted some of them. The change in the average weekly wage, well, that's always going to go up and down. That's going to affect premiums. Changes in investment income of the carrier's reserve. That's a big pressure on premiums, and the national economy and investments have an influence there. The changes in type of employment in the state. If construction grows, that's a pressure up on premiums because of those particular jobs are more dangerous, can be more dangerous. If you bring in a couple of large call centers, well, those jobs are less dangerous, and that brings pressure down. A drop in oil production, that's had a significant effect. And so the type of employment that you're trying to cover, as that changes, that's going to affect premiums. Adoption of treatment guidelines, medical formularies, those both have an effect. And improvements in treatment mechanisms. If they come up with a better way to treat a back injury, that's going to have an effect. So overall, the general economy has a significant effect on premiums. You can't just look at the changes that the legislature makes in workers' comp statutes. That is a significant factor, but it's just one of many. Now I want to take my workers' comp hat off and just talk as a former employer, an HR manager at a construction and manufacturing company for 18 years, and give that perspective. 24-hour coverage was something that we always looked at as a possibility, as an interest of ours. At the company I worked for, we went 9 years with off-the-shelf insurance projects, and we saw over that period of time that we were paying more in premiums than we were seeing in benefits. And it didn't take us long to figure out, well, we can do this if we just pool the money and pay claims out of it. Now, we were in a unique situation. We had a very young average age of our employees. Our biggest expense was having babies. That was the thing that we were covering the most of. And so it made sense to us to self-insure. And I really see 24-hour coverage as a significant interest for companies that self-insure. It just makes sense. With self-insurance, you're given the ability to craft a benefits package that is specifically tailored to the needs of your employees. And you can look at utilization to see, okay, we're getting a lot of claims in this area, so we certainly want to cover that. We have very few claims in this area, so let's curtail the coverage in that area and use those savings to improve our coverage in other areas. You can look at your experiences over time to make those same kinds of adjustments. You can tie your safety practices. Now, and I'm getting into, if you covered your health insurance and your workers' comp with the same plan, then you can, you have more of an incentive to tailor your safety practices to your experience. If you're getting claims for a certain kind of injury over time, then you can not only make adjustments in your benefits, but also go back into the company and make changes in your practices to reduce those costs. And so it makes safety, I think one of the benefits of it is it makes safety a real-time, real-world part of management decisions within an organization. So in general, the I think the interest of especially a small employer that self-insures, it gives them more control. 24-hour coverage can give them more control over their costs. It can help them craft a product that is more closely tied to their employees' needs, and therefore help them compete for employees. You know, one of the things that I remember we prided ourselves is we were able to steal employees from our competitor because our benefits were better, because we paid attention to our employees, we paid attention to their needs, and we crafted our, at the time, health insurance to just be a better product. And it was one of the things that we were able to use as a tool to steal employees. It also, I think 24-hour coverage would give an employer, especially a manufacturer or a construction company, and any company that has higher danger type jobs, it would give them more incentive to invest in on-site clinics so that they could treat immediately on-site. It also, I think, would fit well with telemedicine. Telemedicine is not something out in the future. Telemedicine is here, and it is going to be part of the workers' comp world. And I think this would be, 24-hour insurance would be a nice fit for telemedicine. Now, there are some concerns about how do you craft 24-hour insurance, and I'm certainly leave that discussion to the representative, but I wanted to give the perspective of the small employer and the benefits that potentially they could see out of 24-hour insurance. Representative, I'd certainly answer any questions if, or I would defer to someone that could answer the question.
That's really good. The 24/7, if you wanted to do that, could you start, or would you start with a carrier that does work comp, or would you start with one that has been a medical insurance carrier first? Is there an advantage one has over the other?
Well, I see the experience with medical insurance, with health insurance, as a nice base to start from to add a workers' comp component. The specifics of the required benefits of workers' comp, that's going to be the challenge. How do you integrate those into a one plan that has health insurance and workers' comp benefits? So I would think starting with a health insurance plan would be the easier way to go.
Back to the work comp, if we have post-accident drug and alcohol testing, but in order to do that, you typically have to have that in writing that you're going to do that prior to conducting those tests. Is that correct?
Yes, and that was one of the things that we did. We had over-the-road drivers, and so not only do we have post-accident testing, but we had I forget the word, but surprise testing. And one of the things that we did was we went a step further, and we required it of everyone, not just our DOT drivers, but everyone that worked at the company, even the owner, would submit to drug testing. Now, there are some, as I understand, some current, I think it's federal limitations either being considered or coming into place that are going to significantly limit your ability to do after accident drug testing. I think the standard will become higher than reasonable suspicion. I can't remember the specifics, but I know that you won't be able to do automatic after accident drug testing. That there will have to be that the federal government is putting in a higher standard than that.
Follow up.
You're recognized for as many follow-ups as you think that you need. You don't have to be recognized each time.
So somebody's operating a forklift, they cause either property damage or bodily injury to themselves or somebody else. That typically triggers that, not a random drug test, but a post-accident drug test. And that's the kind of criteria you're talking about?
Well, that's the current criteria.
Okay.
But the federal government is, I forget, what is it, is it OSHA? OSHA is putting in and is it a reasonable suspicion standard that they're adding? It's something along those lines that's is higher than just an automatic after-accident drug test.
Okay, so first of all, it's probably not constitutional in interference, and probably would lead to a less safer workplace environment. But if you are going to do the drug testing on a post-accident basis, you have that employee there. You can't just tell that employee that you're suspecting of being under the influence to then go drive themselves over to go get something, get tested, and perhaps cause more damage to themselves or somebody else. Can you walk us through how that would typically take place? Could they conduct it on their site, or do they have to go to a clinic, and then you have to have chain of custody and all that kind of thing on the sample?
Well, that's a good question, and I haven't really thought that through. In 24-hour insurance, that may create a different situation. Typically, if it's after accident, my understanding is they do it at the medical facility where they're being treated. So I don't really have a good answer for you there.
Because you really wouldn't want too much time to elapse, and we do have a couple of really good risk managers in the audience. I don't know if they want to speak to this. What do you guys do? Charles and Becky, you guys want to speak to that? Okay. Okay. On a third party, not what you guys do, but what you've heard of other people doing, perhaps. In the world of risk management, in the bigger picture.
The OSHA regulation is currently being challenged.
Right.
So it could be that doesn't move forward.
Yeah, I think they've delayed it because of the challenge. Yeah.
So does our labor commission, does that body then get involved in that, because they're otherwise kind of the state version of OSHA?
Well, they could push for state statutes. They really wouldn't get involved in the OSHA, the federal OSHA requirements that I can see.
Okay. So then they mentioned this morning about prescription drugs and opiates, and that area continuing to be a concern, and it looked like Oklahoma is one of the 4 states that were on the highest level for prescription drug cost. And we're looking at some more things on the opiate use and how to resolve that. It's not something that's an easy fix by any stretch. Do you have any comments on how the court looks at the drug costs and how prescriptions are dispensed, and can we, those would be coming up on random drug tests, and that's one of the things that the pain docs look at is how is somebody medicating themselves, and when they first come in there, are they already self-medicating, and with what? And there's a kind of a shutdown on some of the more accurate urinalysis tests. There's one that's probably 98% accurate, and then the cup with the stick, that's like 66 or 67% accurate. But they're making it much more difficult to utilize the much more accurate one that would be a confirmation style. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the thing that I found interesting in the presentation that we saw this morning, if you looked at the southeast United States versus the Midwest, there was a significantly higher prevalence of opioid misuse and I think could be described as overprescription in the South versus the Midwest, and that was just curious to me. Why would there be a regional difference in what doctors are prescribing, one, and then in misuse in the other? I think your question is a little bit beyond what we deal with at the Commission. My understanding is that the legislature is looking at ways to encourage less dependence on the opioids. And I know the doctors are. We've had several presentations from the medical community on how they're recognizing that opioid abuse and overprescription are significant problem, especially in workers' comp. Reliance on pain medication, I think, is unfortunately a natural direction that a lot of workers' comp cases go. And the doctors recognize this, and they are looking within their own community to reduce both the overprescription, maybe start with lower level prescriptions to begin with, and look for other pain options. So we've had several presentations from the medical community making it clear that they recognize this is a significant problem, and it's really up to them to try to make changes.
The last follow-up I have is, as we see the cost of health care and healthcare insurance continuing to rise, that's a kind of a major factor, those costs in the cost of work comp. And have you had any thoughts about how that's trending? It looked like it was trending pretty well in Oklahoma, but as we see those costs nationally go up, it almost can't help but affect our costs on work comp, wouldn't you think? Sure.
The cost of medical care in general has an effect on workers' comp. Now, we work through a fee schedule that is set by the legislature. We review it, make recommendations to the legislature, and then it goes through the rule process to set a new fee schedule. We're operating on a fairly, I think it's a 2012 fee schedule from 2012, and we are in the process of looking at what modifications it needs. We're not in a hurry. The thought is that the workers' comp statute is only 2.5 years old. It's really too soon to jump in and start trying to make modifications to a fee schedule that really hasn't settled in yet. And so we've started the process, and I think that's important to educate ourselves as much as possible on what's out of line, who are the winners, who are the losers, where can we make adjustments to bring the fee schedule to a reasonable level. My hope is that we eventually come up with a logical, predictable formula of some kind. 38 other states have formulas, and it seems to work for them. It would make sense for us to move that direction, but we don't want to shock the system. We don't want to drive the medical community out of workers' comp. We want them to believe that they can be successful in workers' comp, and the fee schedule is a big part of that. So medical costs are a big part of workers' comp, just in a different way, because we have the statutory fee schedule to set those costs.
So the cost in the schedule, the fee schedule for work comp, is higher than the Medicaid rate, higher than the Medicare rate, that physicians dealing with patients that aren't hurt or sick on the job have to expect for reimbursement. Is that correct?
The schedule has an upper limit on each of the different specialties. Typically, I'm going to guess around 150% of the Medicare rate. And that's to incentivize medical providers to participate in workers' comp. What we find is most of them don't pay that rate because they're part of a group, part of an organization that negotiates their fees at a lower rate. So what we're doing when we set the fee schedule, or when the legislature sets a fee schedule, is they're setting an upper limit that those medical providers can work within.
So they then negotiate to be competitive to get the business at all. And then what's the turnaround time on payment? That's the other part is you can get paid a lot, but if it takes you a long time to get it, it's not worth as much. So what's the turnaround time on the payment for work comp versus Medicaid or Medicare?
Well, you've asked one that I can't tap dance and answer for you. I don't know the answer to that.
I would think that it would probably be faster.
If it's a negotiated deal, then yes, you would hope so. You would hope they'd negotiate a deal that gets them paid. Because for a doctor's office, the surety of payment is a significant factor, so I would agree.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Is there any questions from anybody? Yes, sir.
Excuse me. I might add a couple of points. I'm Bob Dillon, Chairman of the Workers' Compensation Commission.
You're recognized.
With your permission, thank you. I think Marge did an excellent job in summarizing what we've done, some of the progress. With respect to the opioids, I think the legislature did a beautiful job in passing the law on the closed formulary, which means there are certain narcotics that the doctor cannot prescribe unless it's pre-authorized by the employer or the administrative law judge. Orders it. And in Texas, this dropped the opioid prescriptions 80%.
Wow.
And we don't have data on that. We do have anecdotal evidence that our opioid costs are going down drastically also. On the second point, on medical costs, again, I think the legislature passed a reasonable statute that really allows the employer to control the medical. In other words, if the employee can have one change of physician, but it's got to be 3 doctors selected by the employer. So the employer is the one that's really hiring that doctor, and they should be the ones that are controlling those costs. I mean, since they're appointing them, there should be negotiation to and from between the doctor and the employer, the insurance carrier, to keep those costs as low as possible. So there's a mechanism in place to cover both the drug issue and the medical cost issue.
So the pre-authorization, that bill, I think, takes effect November 1 of this year?
No, that's in effect.
It's in effect now? And then the doctors, that choice of 3, when the employee says, hey, I want to change docs, that doesn't mean that those other doctors might not be in that group of physicians that handles work comp claims.
That's true. Basically, it's got to be 3 specific doctors, and the employee has to choose from one of those 3. And all I'm saying is that if I was an employer, and I would be listing the doctors who are the best doctors, but at the most reasonable cost. Sure. Because I'm going to have to pay that cost. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Do we have any other comments? OMES? Want to say anything?
Chairman.
Okay, because I appreciate you guys coming. Thank you very much, Mark. That was great. All right. So I know that what I wanted to do also, and I appreciate your time and preparation for that, Mark, That was very well done. House Bill 1255, which we wanted to put out something in the event that Representative Eccles or whoever is going to be leading the charge on any changes or tweaking to work comp, especially since the opt-out and some of the Supreme Court justices have introduced some challenges to the current system. We want to have something that's been proactive and something that perhaps can help the employers of the state, employees of the state, find adequate, not just adequate, but good care in the event that they're hurt or sick on the job. So one of the things that we came up with back in 2013 was, back then, House Bill 1255. And a number of you that we'd invited, I think we sent those in an attachment to the email. And I don't know if we have some printed off, but also my assistant Denise Hayter can email you. We'll email you a copy of that as well if you'd like a copy. But we'll have those available here. The House Bill 1255, one of the things that it did was we looked at, and this is back in 2013, so it's kind of like that 2012. You think those 2012 reimbursement rates might be low. Well, with the way things are going, they're probably pretty good still, you know. So this reduces the length of claims and should also reduce work comp costs, 1255 should, by approximately 50%. It reduces the length of claims to a maximum of 520 months or 10 years. It defines marriage or marriage relationships for purposes of claims, and it also includes cohabitation as basically being married, since we still have common law marriage. There's a 2-year benefit for remarriage. It's kind of like a wedding gift. If they remarry and they didn't want to run out the clock on having to stay single, the surviving spouse, in order to continue to get the benefit, we said for the benefit of the family and the kids and everything, it's usually better to have a marriage relationship. We want to support marriage. So we said, okay, we'll have a 2-year benefit in the event that they remarry. I wonder if we can backdate that for everybody. No. All right, so then we have post-accident drug testing is encouraged. That would be encouraged, but it would also require that people have that in writing prior to utilizing that. And also random drug testing is encouraged as well. And no employee testing positive for either alcohol or legal or illegal drugs, well, especially even legal drugs that their use might affect your ability to operate equipment or drive, would be eligible for compensation. There's an oral or written notice of claim that must occur within 30 days. There's a compensation payable shall be reduced by up to 50% if the employee doesn't obey laws enacted for their protection, both at the state and federal level. There's a permanent partial impairment requirement. It says it's not allowed if the injury qualifies for temporary total disability and is a non-surgical soft tissue injury, and the employee returns to work in the same capacity for any employer. And then the sum of all permanent partial impairment awards shall not exceed 520 months or 10 years. By putting a cap on it, it did reduce, the length of claims, resulted in a number of savings. So we were able to come up with what we think would be about a 50% rate decrease or cost decrease, which would affect the rates as well, and doesn't necessarily totally obliterate the current system for work comp, which seems to be a burr under the saddle. So take a copy of that, look it over, and if you have any tweaks or changes to that, if you have any concerns, if you have any suggestions, please write those up and get those back to my office, and we will work on that. We may do a short work study prior to the session starting, because anything you can do prior to the session saves an enormous amount of time. Bills have to be, the process begins around the second week of December. So a lot of people think that, you can wait until February to introduce something. Well, you can't. The process starts in early December. So the train leaves the station then, and if you're not on board, you do have to wait another year. So we want to get on top of this early, and then to utilize the staff that we have, the attorneys and the LSB, the Legislative Staff Bureau. Their time is better spent, and they can do more work if we spread it out, and that is during the off session. So if we can work on some of these things during the off session, it just helps the workload that much better. And given the kind of construction or deconstruction that's going on at the Capitol, and where some people are officed, it's going to cause interruptions in service and that kind of thing to a certain extent. And so we want to try to get on top of these things early. But we appreciate the work comp court. If there's anything we can do to help you guys, let us know as well. And some of my favorite people are here from the big self-insureds that are kind of the, not outliers, but they're the risk takers. And it's kind of funny because you all are the risk managers too, taking the risk. And we appreciate you very much. We would like to do something on a 24/7 basis at some point. And one of the chassis that we have with health insurance headed towards, on a national basis, headed towards a single payer system, we want, and we feel like it's almost getting to an urgent state now, that we have some different options. And what those are going to be, whether we open the doors for more competition or utilize some of the assets that we have in the state, I think there's some things that we can do. Oklahoma, I think, is better positioned than other states to provide some viable options for people to get and receive health care. So with that, unless there's something else from the chairman or any other questions or concerns that you guys want to address.
Are there any other additional comments or questions regarding this study by Representative Moore? Representative Moore, we will make sure the record reflects that we are done on budget and under time on this study. So you get extra credit for that. Representative Moore, unless you have anything else, we'll conclude this study.
The only other thing is I've got about 3 or 4 more of the books from this morning's NCCI meeting. If you'd like to pick up a copy of those, you can. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Moore. Again, I appreciate those of you who are present today. This is a very important issue, one that I worked on during my time at the House that is coming to an end, and so I look forward to seeing the solutions that are brought to the table in this next legislative session. Commend all of you for being here and appreciate your time. Is there any other business to come before the committee today? Seeing no additional business, again, we will reconvene tomorrow at 9 o'clock for an interim study regarding civil asset forfeiture. I know all of you are looking forward to being here for that. And without any other business, we'll call the meeting adjourned.